Hey guys, Stephen Cox here, and today I'm going live to show you a little bit of information about grooving. So grooving is kind of interesting because it's really a very feel-based thing, but we're going to talk through it anyway and talk about some of the simpler aspects like rhythm. So what kind of rhythms do we want to lock in on? How do we make it danceable, or how do we make it kind of groove a little harder? So that's kind of our goal for the day. So first I want to talk about what kind of creates groove. So basically, typically the bass and the drums work together to create some grooves, right? But basically we got to know what drum to listen to figure out how to play along with the drummer. But this isn't just about playing along with the drummer. If you were playing along with an ukulele player or a guitar player without a drummer, you still have to provide what the drums would give it, what the bass drum would give it. Sometimes when people are strumming on a guitar or something, they'll do what the snare drum is giving it. So like they might have a backbeat, like if they were strumming chords. So beats 2 and 4 are louder and they're just a little bit more accented. Hey Robert, how's it going? And so we need to provide what the bass drum would do, which is what the drummer would do with their foot, basically the big drum on the floor, the kick drum, bass drum, same name. And it's no coincidence that we're going to be locking in with that drum. It has a low frequency just like we do, so it just makes everything more powerful when we do that. So let's talk about some different rhythms that drummers might do. So the first one is just going to be hitting beat 1 and beat 3. So that would be like half notes for us. So if the drummer's playing the groove and the bass drums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can hear I've got a cajon underneath me, so I'm actually hitting it with my heel, and it's actually giving it a little bit of bass drum thump to it. But all we really need to know there is that we have to lock in with those to groove. So the simplest way to do that would just be to play half notes. So it doesn't really matter what our chords are, what other things are. Hello, Paula, how are you doing? And basically the main thing is just locking in with what the kick drum is doing. So if we got those half notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, we could go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the strongest thing we can play. And so it's kind of like as long as we're playing on those beats, we can kind of get away with doing some stuff in between as well. But those are the most important things. And playing that simply will give it a nice groove. So what could we do instead of just doing that? We could go, right? We could add a note in between. We could add notes after or before, but we want to make sure that we're hitting both of those with the bass drum and not overcomplicating it. Might be a little bit too much, but depending on the style and the song, you can kind of get away with adding some extra stuff in. But the main thing there is just hearing that 1, 2, 3, 4. So a common place you might hear this is in country music. So we might play the root and the fifth over this rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or, so if we're talking about the root and the fifth there, that would sound like a country line, of course. And basically there are other videos on my beginner playlist that kind of go over this. The introduction has a little bit more on what the root fifth relationship means. So today we're just focusing on rhythm. So we've got half notes, very straightforward, okay? Well, the next thing we could do is quarter notes all the way through. This is sometimes referred to as 4 on the floor, where the drums are just going 1, 2, 3, 4 with the bass drum. So 1, 2, 3, 4. If we lock in with that, then it's really danceable. You could think of like even old jazz in big bands would use that because it was really hard to hear the bass and the drums separately, so they would work together to kind of cut through all those different horns in big bands. So we could kind of do a walking line if we wanted to there. We could do root notes where we just play a single note with that. We could do roots and fifths if we wanted to. There are a whole lot of things we can do, but the important thing is just that we lock in with that. So if it's going boom, 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 we could go. That's pretty solid, right? We could do octaves. Kind of doesn't matter really what we're playing entirely as long as it locks in with that rhythm. All right. Hi, Wendy. Hi, Andre. And so we'll just do that, right? So we've got boom. And if you listen to Stevie Wonder's Superstition, it kind of does that a little bit. Even though it's technically not bass there, technically he's playing a synthesizer bass part. Live, a bass player would play it. So just pedaling that E. But then you could also add some notes in there just to kind of like anticipate the rhythm if you wanted to. Right? So it's in between the notes on the upbeats, on the E's and the U's. If you know about 16th notes, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But for now, just know quarter note lines. We could just drive the root. So if we had a song that had a chord progression, like we could just play roots with that. So if we're trying to make something danceable, we could just stick very, very simply to that. If you wanted to, you could add octaves in between. So this will sound like disco, where you're going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, or the low version of the note, then the high version of the note. If you don't know what octaves are, basically it's like we're playing a low G down here, which is the 3rd fret on the E string. We could play the high G after that, and that's an octave up. So basically what I'm doing to find that note, if I'm on the 3rd fret on the E string, I'm adding 2 frets and then going 2 strings thinner. Sorry about that. So that'd be the 3rd fret on the E string, and then you'd end up on the 5th fret on the D string. And so then now we can put those octaves on the 8th notes in between the quarter notes. So if the drums are going boom, 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 we can go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that's a really common thing. You might hear it in songs like Funky Town. You'd hear it in a lot of disco. And it doesn't matter what the line is. The line can change around. The chords could be changing. But if we have that solid groove, right? So we could do that kind of stuff to make it a little bit more interesting. And then from there, you can, of course, double certain notes as long as they're in between. As long as we have that solid 4 on the floor feel. Or you could do, but the important thing is that we have the lower notes locking in with the kick drum on every downbeat. So we don't have to do that every time the drummer is doing that, but that's going to make it groove a lot. And so then some other rhythms that we could do. Sometimes in bossa novas and other kinds of music that's got a little bit more of a Latin flair to it, we might not just go with half notes, and we're not going to do quarter notes there. So what we might hear is dotted quarter notes followed by an 8th note. So if you don't know what that rhythm means or what it looks like, that's okay. We're just going to talk about it. So basically the first hit's going to be on beat 1, and then we're going to be counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but we're not going to be hitting all those notes. We just want to be counting that. So let me go through what the rhythm sounds like first and just demonstrate it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. You get the idea? So basically you're playing on beat 1, then the and after beat 2. 1 and 2 and, right? And then we're playing on beat 3, which is immediately after that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And then we're playing on that and after beat 4 as well. So what we could kind of do there is we could do the root 5th line that we were already playing. 1 and 2. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. I kind of did some variations there, really by accident. We could play 2 of the root notes and 2 of the fifths. So it's kind of like that country line, only we're doubling each note with this rhythm. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. And so what you notice is that on beat 1, I just played 1 of the root notes, and then I played the N2 was, or N3, sorry, N3 was going to be on the fifth. And if you don't know what fifths are, once again, I have another video that's basically like the first lesson kind of thing, or how to play songs on the spot. It's another one where I talk about where these numbers are coming from, where that number fifth is coming from. Hi, Seth. How's it going? A horse beat. Interesting. I was thinking horse would be more like a gallop, you know, like if you're playing metal, you've got dun 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 dun. I was thinking of that as a horse beat, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, but that's a little bit different. Still a groove, just used in more rock music, but still a really strong groove and a good example of all this stuff. But let's take it back to the bossa nova. So we could just play a whole song using that. If you are looking at lead sheets, and in one corner of the lead sheet, if you know what that is, it's basically a piece of music that has the melody and then has the chords written above it. And so it's like you can fake your way through it by not ever having heard the song. If you know the style, which it'll tell you in the corner sometimes. If you look in a book called The Real Book or any fake books, it's funny, The Real Book is really a fake book, so that's all confusing. But if you're trying to learn jazz songs, you'll get one of these books and it'll have a whole bunch of sheet music. It'll have the title of the song, and then to the left of the title, it'll have what style to play it in. Sometimes it'll say medium swing. Sometimes it'll say Latin. And if it's Latin, a lot of times this bossa nova pattern will work. And if it's a samba, it's like the bossa nova pattern is just really fast. At least that's the basic way to play. It's kind of like I'm simplifying things here, but that's something that will work over it. If you listen to a whole lot of traditional music, or you listen to a lot of professional players, they will vary from this, but it will be based around one of these patterns. So if we were doing a samba, we might just double time it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's kind of like you're playing on the 16th notes instead of the 8th notes, or you can think of the tempo as being 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. You get the idea. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But either way, we've got a little groove there. So most of our grooves are going to start with beat 1 for sure, and then we'll kind of move out from there. So I see John says reggae ? So reggae is a little bit different, and we'll kind of get to that since that's more complicated. I want to like ramp up in levels of simplicity to complex before we get there, because with reggae, you shouldn't really have a just simple default to go there, but there are some ideas that'll help you organize that. But reggae has a lot more variations to it, even on the simpler level. Real books of fakes. That's funny. Right, trying to organize explaining real books and fake books to people. It's like they're all fake books. The real book is just a funny name for the most common fake book out there. Way to fake your way through songs. Okay, so anyway, we've got that now. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And sometimes that rhythm will be used in a pop context, and then you can just play the root notes and not do the fifth. And you might hear that sometimes too. So it's the same groove as far as what the bass drum locks in with the bass line, but it's not always the root and the fifth. Okay, so now that we've got that, I think I talked about this in some of the other groove videos, but you could do kind of like a New Orleans kind of sound. And actually, before we get to New Orleans, why don't we do the calypso thing? So I talked about this in the 5 lines you could play over island strum, but you get this pattern where it's like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so we play on beat 1, we play on the and after beat 2, 1 and 2 and then we play on beat 4. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and it works really nice with arpeggios. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 once again, if you don't know about arpeggios, I have lessons on that too. It's not the crux of this lesson, so look at that beginner playlist that I have on my channel if you want to know more about arpeggios, scales, and all this other stuff that we'll talk about a little bit here. But today we're just talking about groove. So yes, it's a very common thing. Boom, boom, boom. If you hear it faster, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. So it's really common among a lot of styles. But you'll hear that a lot of times. So that's that groove with the drummer there, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and it's also called a 1-bar clave. You could also swing this rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and which really just changes the way we're counting. And so therefore the only note of that groove that we were doing that would change would be the and after 2 would happen a little bit later. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. And so basically when I'm counting there, I'm counting long, short, long, short, long, short, long, short, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and we can get more into swing rhythm and other videos too, but it's basically like you have a long note that's almost twice as long as the short note following it. So beat 1 will be like, if you split it into 3 equal parts, beat 1 will be like 1. So if you have like 1 2 3, then shoot, I can't count 1 2 3 if we're doing that. This is hard to explain. So swinging rhythms is almost like you're splitting the beats into triplets. So if we were doing 1 2 3 4, 1 a lit, 2 a lit, 3 a lit, 4 a lit, 1 2 3 4, and then we're combining the first 2 of each triplet. So we're holding those out. Triple lit, 1 a lit, 2 a lit, 3 a lit, 4 a lit. But then we're just counting them like eighth notes, so we don't have to think of that 3-note thing happening all at once. So we go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and just to keep track of it. And it's a little bit looser than that, but that's really what it's based on. If you tried to program that into a machine, it would lose part of that swing groove because it's not meant to be exact. It's meant to be a little bit loose, so it has a kind of flavor to it, something a little bit different than a machine can do, really. And you can kind of imitate it a little bit with modern technology, but it's hard to do. So I'm glad that's helpful. But basically, we've got that, so we could do the same exact rhythm with the more New Orleans style. So if like a drummer's going, and the bass drum would be going boom, 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 2 and 3 and 4. Okay, so we get the idea. That last couple notes was a very, very silly ending to put on that, but you get the idea. Okay, so we've got that. While we're talking about swung grooves, we could talk about a little bit of blues, right? So blues uses the swing rhythm a lot. There's some very common patterns. There's a bass line from a song called I'm Tore Down that sounds like this. And basically what we're doing there is not straight, swung eighth notes, but we're playing all of them. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 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 so just in case you're wanting to do that line, then you apply that to the 12-bar blues changes, which once again, I have a video on the 12-bar blues that you can just apply this pattern to that video, to that format of the 12-bar blues and be able to play it in whichever key you pick to play it in. But basically what I'm playing for that pattern is I'm starting on a G right now. The song is really in C, but I'm going to start on a G. So you play the G note 2 times on the 3rd fret on the E string. Then you go up the octave like we talked about earlier. So now we end up on the 5th fret on the D string. We play that twice. And then we go to the 3rd fret on the D string. And then we go to the 5th fret on the A string. So that's a pattern that we can apply to the 12-bar blues, play all the way through. I'm not going to demonstrate that right now because that's one measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then we play another one. So you apply that to the 12-bar blues changes, and then that's how you play tore down and certain shuffle grooves that fit that song. You'd also do a different set of notes, but with the same rhythm. Well, okay, that adds a little bit there. That gets all the notes of the triplet on that last part. So why don't I just make it simple? Right? So what I'm doing there is 3rd fret on the E string, 2nd fret on the A string, 5th fret on the A string, and the 2nd fret on the D string. So all of these notes I'm playing 2 times until I get to the 2nd note on the D string, which I just play once. And then I play the 5th fret on the D string. Sorry, the 5th fret on the A string at the end of that. Does that make sense? If I went by too fast, let me know and I can explain that again. I'm just going to double check with you guys. Awesome, computer scientist. I hope you like the bass ukulele when you get one. Has that island flare. I'm guessing you're talking about the boom, boom, boom line. That must have been from a while ago. Right. So all this stuff that I'm talking about right now, it's all about scale patterns and all about these other things. But today we're just talking about the groove aspect of it. If you notice when I was playing that, I was starting on my middle finger. Right? And so then I'm assigning my fingers 1 finger per fret and basically using those fingerings from the G major scale. Only there's one note in there that's not in the G major scale, but I'm still assigning 1 finger per fret. So if I'm playing the G on the E string, I'm using my middle finger. Any 2nd fret notes I'm playing with my pointer finger. Any 5th fret notes I'm playing with my pinky. If I had any ring finger notes, they would be on the 4th fret. And then once again, any 3rd fret notes with the middle finger. Okay, so hopefully that helps kind of like keep that groove and everything. All right, so we got a question about rubber strings or stainless steel. This one has the flat wound strings. So they're flat wound strings and they're round wound strings as far as the metal ones go, and then they're rubber strings. This one right here has that, and then with the rubber strings, I have that on a couple of the bass ukuleles I own as well. So honestly, I like both sounds. It's just a matter of which one I prefer at the moment. For me right now, I actually do like the flat wounds the best because they feel the most like an electric bass. There's not as big of an adjustment from that, and I play electric bass more than U-bass, to be honest. But hopefully that helps a little bit. As far as louder, the round wounds are the loudest, but they're also the most string noise when you slide back and forth. The flat wounds are the 2nd loudest, and the rubber are very quiet in comparison. So acoustically, in order to like jam along with somebody playing guitar or something, the one that comes closest to being able to be heard is the round wound strings. Okay, but back to groove. I'll answer more questions here coming up soon. That one, just didn't want that one to pass by and not see it. Okay, so we've got all these rhythms now. So let's recap them. We've got our half note groove. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. We've got our 4 on the floor groove, which is really just straight quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we can either play right with it or we can do our octaves as eighth notes, so that we still have that going. We just have notes in between them, which is funny doing both those back to back like that in Crazy Train, which I don't think of Crazy Train as a disco song or anything, but there is a little bit of that kind of going on where you're doing octave and then walking down a scale. But that's a cool thing about that bass line. But the point is, that groove is still there. The drums are hitting every beat, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so as long as we hit those, we can get away with putting some notes in between them. All right, and then after that, we talked about a bossa nova, or really just the rhythm, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And a lot of times in the pop setting, we'll leave out the and after beat 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and right. Okay, so then now we have a rock groove. Okay, well, we talked about calypso, right? And the New Orleans feel that has the same kind of vibe, but a swung rhythm. Okay, so now I want to kind of digress back to a rock groove because we kind of skipped over that. A really, really common rock groove is going to be 1, 3, and. So we got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You've probably heard that plenty of times. If the drums are doing that, we probably want to lock in with that. Boom. And notice what I just did there. I added a little fill in there. Right? So we can add little things that aren't strictly part of that, but if we do, it's usually kind of like a fill at the end of the measure, or we keep it fairly simple and just make sure to lock in when the bass drum's hitting is the most important part, whether we add more stuff or not to it. And that is the way to make it groove. So now we've got all that. I know that somebody mentioned reggae earlier. Who is it that mentioned reggae? John. Okay. So reggae is a little bit more confusing because this is the first time that we've talked about today where we leave out beat 1. So beat 1 is just missing, right? So the bass drum's going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So it's like our bass drums either just on beat 3 if you look at it that way, or if you're thinking about like a faster one, you can go dun 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and depending, but it just depends on if you're counting the eighth notes or if you're counting the quarter notes instead. So if we don't have our groove on beat 1, so we just got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and the most important thing is just lining up with that note. We can kind of get away with doing a lot of rhythmic variations on other parts as long as we hit that. So notice how sometimes I'm hitting beat 1 and then making a little groove out of it, but I'm always making sure to hit with the bass drum there. Now, does every song do this? No. Some songs skip that beat every now and then. Sometimes you have to change it up a little bit. But in general, that'll be the strongest groove with it that'll make people kind of bob their heads and get really into it. So that's the biggest thing with the groove is it's all about locking in with the kick drum. Now, I know I've read some comments where people are like, well, what if we're not playing with a drummer? What if that's not really the goal? Well, you are the drummer then. You and the ukulele player or the guitar player that you're playing with, whoever it may be, you are the drummer. So you want to still provide what the bass drum would do in that context to help make the song groove. So if a ukulele player is playing some chords, just play some chords for the heck of it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice how they're hitting 1, 2, 3, 4 in there. That's what the snare drum would do. So we got to do what the bass drum would do there. And you can kind of decide if there's not a drummer there and there's no inkling of what the groove should be, and you don't know the song, or you're making up a song, or however that goes, then you can pick one of these rhythms that we talked about to go along with that. Now, there's certain ones that'll work better than others. If they're swinging the rhythm, don't do one of the grooves that we played that doesn't swing the rhythm, right? But you can kind of take a song into a different style. If you're just like writing or jamming, you can kind of make things different style. So I have that video that was 5 bass lines you can play over island strum. If you're going dun 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 on the ukulele, that's an island strum rhythm. Basically, it's been dubbed island strum. Dun 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 dun. It'll sound country if you play the 1/5 line. Dun 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 dun. That one might not work as well over there if we do the bossa nova line. So let's try dun 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 dun. So you can see that arpeggio line that's more like calypso. That 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 is actually in that strum pattern. So that one will work really well with it. And then we could always just play quarter notes. Dun 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 dun. So hopefully that gives you an idea of how to make those things groove. So that's not every style, right? We've covered a little bit of jazz with the walking lines. There's something in jazz called a two-feel, which is essentially like half notes, like the country line, but you kind of fill in the gaps in between. And jazz is typically the kind of jazz I'm talking about is swung. So if you're doing a country line, you might go boom, boom, and you might add a walk up every now and then, right? But if you're doing jazz, you might end up going like boom, da-da. You could do that over country too, really, depending on the song and depending on what groove the drummer is giving you, the guitar player is giving you. But the most important thing is just making sure that you're hitting beats 1 and beats 3 to make it groove really strong. So, do I still have y'all over there? Does everybody understand that? Are y'all following along? If you are, hit the like button or comment yes, that makes sense, or give me a question that will help me know what I need to do to clarify this for you. So while we're talking about that, we could go into groove. Thanks, Seth, for letting me know. So we could talk about grooving on funk, right? So what if someone is playing like giving you a lot of space? They're playing one and. Well, then the main thing that you could do is play one and then kind of mess around with it after that. So you got one and. So see, I'm playing all those other stuff, but I'm making sure I'm hitting boom, 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 boom. And you don't want to change it up like too much. Like maybe you want to make a groove that's repetitive. But the important thing is that. So we got 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3, 4. And sometimes you'll hear the drums, not the bass drum, but maybe the snare drum and some other things happening. It's like you have that bass groove. Some of those variations that you might hear. So the important thing is just getting that boom, boom, and then you can lock in with some of those other hits if you want to keep it grooving strong, even though we're being busier. And so I'm adding a lot of things in there, right? One thing that I'm thinking about with funk is I'm counting, or at least thinking in 16th notes. So instead of going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and I'm thinking 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a, and no, my brain's not literally counting 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a, it's more like da 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 da. So I don't have to think about these numbers and these syllables. But if you're thinking da 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 da, then you try to play interesting patterns of those where you leave certain ones out and play other ones. You know, it's hard to do that and play, but so we got I can't do right. So it's hard to demonstrate that, but in my head that pulse is going on, and a lot of times the drummer will be keeping that pulse. 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 1. So it's like they're playing more of the 16th notes. We can kind of play more of the 16th notes, but we want to try to lock in with whatever that groove is that's going on. So if they're accenting certain notes, we might try to accent with the drummer. If there's not a drummer there, you can get away with a little bit more, but you don't want to overcomplicate it to the point where it gets in the way of what the ukulele player is playing, or the guitar player is playing, or the piano player. So the key there is to really lock in on just whatever that groove is. It could just be one beat. It doesn't have to be boom, boom. It could be boom. And then you can do a whole lot of syncopated rhythms. So syncopation is kind of what we're doing when we start throwing in these 8th notes and 16th notes and notes that aren't on the downbeats, right? 1E and a 2E and a, so we could play a 1E and a 2E and a, right? So the uhs and the e's are kind of cool in funk. This is a more advanced concept. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E, right? 1E and a 2E and a 4E and a 1E and a, whoops. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a, right? So we can hit the uhs, the ands, and the e's to make it a little bit more interesting. But once again, you got to really ask yourself, does this still have a danceable quality to it? And so you might notice that when I start doing that stuff, I start keeping time with my hand, even in slight motions. That's just out of habit. But it's kind of like if you have something keeping track of where beats 2 and 4 are, that's where the snare drum would hit. And you're playing around that. So you can kind of do that, and that helps you groove a little bit. Although if you're playing with a drummer, you won't need to actually play the snare part. Just having something, it could be your head bobbing, it could be your foot tapping, or it could be lightly tapping on the strings. 2, 3, 4. And it shouldn't mess up the groove at all because the drummer should be hitting those beats 2 and 4 on the snare drum, so it'll probably cover up any little tiny noise you might be making if you actually were. But sometimes that can help you feel the groove a little bit more. So does anybody have any questions about grooving like that? Yeah, you could even add with the backbeats on 2 and 4. You could play that over a walking line. It's just you've got to kind of like play through the string to get that attack going on. Right, so we go. I don't know why I went major there, but you get the idea. So we could do a blues line too. Yeah, so you can kind of get away with doing stuff like that as well. But that's the main thing. So when I'm doing loop pedal songs, I loop what the drums would be doing usually first, because it's easier to kind of play along to a pattern like that. So I might be thinking, when I slap, I'm thinking about what the bass drum's doing, and when I'm popping, I'm thinking about what the snare drum's doing. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's our simple groove where we're playing beats 1 and 3. So we could do a country groove over that, but we could really get away with doing a lot of other things over that too. But that's what's important. And then I go back in and add what the hi-hat would do. And sometimes the hi-hat, which is one of the it's like the two cymbals that face each other that are connected to a pedal that a drummer has, if you don't know what a hi-hat is. And sometimes I'll add what that would be doing after establishing my groove with the drum part. So like, let's say, here's the drum part. Bass drum, snare drum, bass drum, snare drum. Okay, so hopefully that looped fine, even though I kind of, yeah, it didn't quite work. Okay. hit it a little bit late. You gotta be really in time with the loop pedal. That's better. Okay. So then sometimes what I'll add, so now we've got that keeping that pulse, right? And if it's perfectly in time, great. This isn't quite perfectly in time, but hopefully you get the idea. So now we've got boom, boom. So we go. But when I add that part, it doesn't really make it sound as country. So now I'd go. So notice that I'm still hitting beat 1 and beat 3. I'm just adding stuff in the middle. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Or basically, as long as we're locking in with that, we can kind of get away with a little bit more depending on the genre. But the most important part is just locking in. Okay. So that's basically it with groove stuff. There are a whole lot of different grooves, and we could get way, way, way deeper into this and more specific things. And a lot of songs have specific bass drum rhythms. These are just the most common ones that I come across the most, I would say. And I may have left one or two out that are also very common. You might hear like boom, 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 right? In which case you do that to lock in with it. You know, just make some sort of line that essentially does the same thing, whether you have a little bit more to it or not, making sure you lock in with that stuff. All right, so now it's time to answer questions. If you have some questions, let me know in the comments, and I will go ahead and answer some that I got from before the live stream. Oh, thank you so much, Wendy. Appreciate it. Awesome. It's very sweet of you. If you have a question, let me know, and I'll be happy to answer it. So let me answer a few questions from one of my patrons, Zach. Zach said, do you have any tips on how you go about learning new songs? And I think the answer is so many, right? But let me read the next question. It's kind of part of this question. Do you break things down into chunks and work on them until you got it and then piece them all together? And the answer there is it depends on the song. If there's a song with a hard bass line, like I was learning a Victor Wooten song the other week, and man, it was tough. I can't say that I can play it perfectly, but I can say that it's tough, you know? And if you're playing something like that, then you kind of have to break it down into little sections and just play over it until it really, really sticks in your mind, and that you really got to memorize before moving on to the next section if it's something super difficult like that. You may want to, if it's a simpler song and you're just trying to figure out how to remember it, you may want to learn the song form. So you may be like, okay, this is the verse part, this is the chorus part, this is the bridge, and the form of the song is, and you have an intro and an outro. So you're like, okay, so the intro, I'm not playing anything. And then on the verse, I have the verse part, which let's just use one of our grooves. Boom, da-da-da, just make something up. Let's just say it was that. Well, then you learn that groove, and then you have a chorus groove. Let's say it's like, right? So we have a chorus part or something. So we would play the verse anytime there's a verse part, and the chorus anytime there's a chorus part, and we'd break them down to the basic grooves. So then you've got intro, verse, chorus, a guitar solo over the verse, maybe a bridge, 2 choruses, and an outro. So that's a very common form. Sometimes the solo happens before the bridge. Sometimes the bridge happens before the solo. But that's kind of a common pop thing. So if you know the song form, then you just got to know the individual parts. And then once you know the individual parts, you may want to go back and learn the variations of the parts if you're listening to the song and you go, oh, the bass player did something different on the second verse than the first verse, but the chords are the same. So then you just got to remember what's that difference rather than learning an entirely new thing. You just learn the different fills or the different bass line if it's a totally different groove, you know. But that's what I do to kind of chunk it down. Is I learn song form first, and then I go in and do that. So Zach had a couple of other questions, I believe. And he said, what type of songs do you gravitate towards playing if it's your choice? I definitely like funk, hence the slap bass stuff. So I like things like Wolfpack is a lot of fun because they have some really challenging bass lines that are quite fun. Joe Dart's a great bass player. If you haven't checked them out, Vulfpeck, Wolfpack, kind of like Wolfpack, but not English sounding. I don't know. So you got that. I like playing some jazz fusion kinds of stuff. You can tell from stuff that I've written. There was that song in 7/8 that I wrote a little while ago. So there are just a lot of little things like that I like to play over. Oh, and I think there was one more question. So let's see. And after I get that question, I'll get to everybody else's questions. Do you like bass-driven songs, or do you enjoy just being that backbone in a band, or both? The answer is definitely both. Sometimes it's really fun just to lay back and play even a country bass line. I know it's like sometimes people go, "Oh, that's boring." It's like it's not really. If the rest of the band is boring, it can be, but your job as a bass player is to play in that groove. And one thing I want to mention is that note length is important with groove. So depending on the style, you might notice that I'm sustaining notes, right? On country, we're kind of imitating an upright bass, so the sustain is shorter. So we may want to play shorter notes with more space in between them. So see how I can like breathe between them? So I cut the notes off a little bit early so it's not going. Just depending on the song. Some songs do call for that, but in general, it's little things like that to know about each style that makes the song sound more legitimate, makes the song sound more authentic is a good word. So knowing that kind of thing, knowing if you want to mute the string to get a different kind of sound. So you got a whole lot of options there as well. But I like bass-driven songs a whole bunch as well because it's just fun to play, and you feel like it's, you know, I mean, there's the attention part. It's fun to be the one driving the song. Heck yeah. And then other times I just like locking in. So that's kind of the idea there. All right, so let's get to some other questions. What would you say is the big difference between a walking bass jazz line and a walking bass disco groove line? Okay, so disco, a lot of times it's kind of like walking up a scale. And sometimes it's just following the chord changes, and sometimes we're kind of like walking in between stuff. But a disco walking line has octaves in between every note, first of all. So what if we played a jazz song? This is kind of a fun idea now that you said this. What if we tried to play a jazz song as a disco song? So I'm going to do like a 2-5-1. Only I got to, sorry, got something in my throat. I've got to play them straight eighth notes, not swung. Sorry about that. Right? It sounds like disco. So you could do that, but a lot of times disco will stay on one note longer. In the case of like Funky Town and songs of that nature. And then it'll change chords, but then go back to the original chord. And as far as the ones that walk around, they're usually walking up a scale or back down. They're not usually skipping up arpeggios doing the octaves. Like it's not usually, although you can, and that sounds pretty cool. It's usually more stepwise motion up the scale. It might jump back down or something, and it might have little fills and little chromatic things that walk in there. So it's still loosely related. I would say they're more repetitive as well. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. But great idea of combining the two. I might use that to write a little bit. That sounds fun. Like John Deacon from Queen. Oh man, He's a good bass player. So he has a lot of different walks here. It is all about scales with him, and then rhythms. So he sneaks a lot of really, really cool rhythms in there. I don't know if I can give any examples. Dun, 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 you know. So a lot of that stuff is orchestrated. But when he's doing stuff like in Bohemian Rhapsody, do 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 do, most of that, is walking down scales, depending, or walking up scales, and then sometimes he'll do like a 1-5-1 real quickly, right? 1-5-1-5-1, or 1-5-8 if you want to think about it as the upper octave. 8 and 1 are the same note. 8 would just be up the octave. 1-5-8-5-1 happens a little bit there, but there's a lot of little, really fast scale runs. So it's not super crazy on that stuff. But then there is some other stuff that he does where he pulls more from funk, and so he might be doing some octave things and doing some crazy in between stuff. And then there's a lot of subtle stuff in Queen, but I would say know your scales really well, because there's also a lot of classical influence in the Bohemian Rhapsody, Killer Queen kind of sound. I know Queen has so many different sounds from album to album that's really hard to cover everything, but I hope that helps. All right. Yeah, Another One Bites the Dust. That one is not as that one's more of a rhythmic thing, right? And a 1, 2, 3. So let's see, what are the drums doing there? I'm not even sure what the drums do. Dun, 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 dun. So that's a good example of, you have a lot of 16th notes in between. Dun, 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 dun. Notice that he's always bum, 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 hitting right with that bass drum. There's notes in between, but the reason it's such a solid groove is because he's hitting those notes with the bass drum and then adding flavor to it with these other notes. Da da dun. So da da bum bum bum, da dun 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 dun. Except for that one, he hits that one a little bit early, and then the bass drum almost like answers it, kind of dun 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 dun, right? But hopefully that gives you some ideas to play off of. That's a great song for this groove lesson. That's a good example to bring up. So thank you, Seth, for saying that, and thank you, Wendy, for bringing up Queen, because they do have some pretty cool grooves in there, but there's also a whole bunch of walking going on in there. So does anybody else have any questions? I believe there was one other one from Robert that I haven't answered yet. I remember what it was. I answered him via message, but I can tell you guys all of this too. So obviously on my Patreon and in some other places, sometimes I give them away for free, like with signing up with the email list or something. I think I still had the Jingle Bells tab on there, but I have I've been notating out songs a lot, right? So you might see notation that has the musical manuscript on top. So that's like reading notes, quarter notes, half notes, and they're all on the different lines and spaces. And then underneath it has the bass tabs, which are just 4 lines going across that represent our strings, and then the numbers on whichever strings are the frets. But he was wondering, what program do I use to notate all that out? And the answer for me is Guitar Pro. Guitar Pro is not a free software, but I believe there are some other ones online that you can find if you're just trying to tab stuff out, or maybe just trying to notate stuff out. I'm not sure if there are any for free that do both at the same time. If I'm wrong, please feel free to link those in the comments for people watching the video later, because I'm sure they'll appreciate that. If anybody wants to notate songs and do things that way. But in order to do that, you have to understand rhythms pretty well. And honestly, when I notate the songs out, I could go in and think of every note. Oh, this is a G, this is a C. Honestly, when I'm notating it out, I notate the numbers, because there are multiple ways to play the same note. And if you just type a G in on the staff, it'll put whichever default the computer has in there, rather than where you want it to be played necessarily. So let me give an example. The open G string is the same pitch G as the 5th fret on the D string, which is the same pitch as the 10th fret on the A string, which is the same pitch if the bass is completely in tune and intonated correctly, as the 15th fret on the E string. So there are 4 ways to play that same note if it's in tune. Once again, like I said, the intonation's a little bit wonky. But how do you know which one to pick? How does the program know which one to pick? It doesn't always. So you kind of, it's easier when notating stuff out when you have tabs and the sheet music to notate it with the tab, and then the note will always end up in the right place because there's only one way to notate that note, even though there are 4 ways to play it on the bass. There's only one key on piano that'll play that note. We just, because of the way we're tuned, we have 4 ways to play certain notes, 3 ways to play other notes, only 2 ways to play some notes, and with anything from the 4th fret and below on the E string, only 1 way to play those notes in the particular octave. All right, any other questions? Awesome. Well, I'm glad. It looks like Wendy and Seth are both getting a lot out of this. Seth, do you have any more questions? Anybody else still on here that has other questions? I might do another groove example, and then I'll check back in a minute to see if there are any questions on there. So let's see. What's one that we did earlier that might be kind of fun? How about I'm gonna do a bossa nova pattern, and I'm gonna try to add the clave pattern in with my finger strumming, and then hit the bass drum part with my thumb. The clave pattern you could also play on the rim of a snare drum if you were a single drummer rather than a percussion section. So that's kind of what I'm doing. So the thumb is just going boom, 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 and then the finger is going that, one, that. And that's just one of many patterns. But let me do that real quick, and then I'll try to play the bass lines over it so you get an idea of how that sounds. That was not a great example because I forgot to hit some of those thumb notes. And also I did a different clave pattern than I said. So I was saying boom, boom, got. So let me try to do that. Let's see. Already messed it up. Okay, here we go. It's not easy to remember all these different patterns. You can see which one I practice more. Let's see. Ooh, I hit it a little bit late, so when it goes back around on the second time around, you'll hear it. Oh, I didn't loop that. Not a great example. A little out of time, a little bit loose, but you get the idea. So then what I could do is I could add just something to keep the time kind of quietly. So that moves around more than most bossa novas would. You know what? I think if I hold this down, that I can take off the last 2 layers and give you a new bass line. So I'm just gonna do 2 chords this time. There we go. Let's see. Let's see, what's the other chord? There you go. That sounds a little bit more bossa nova-y. just soloing over there. And if you're wondering how I'm coming up with that, I made a progression in C minor. So I'm literally just playing up the C minor scale and down the C minor scale, skipping over some notes. That was straight up the C minor scale. Right? Kind of get the idea with that. All right. Well, cool. Glad you're enjoying grooving along. So that's kind of the idea. And so now you know how you can make different style grooves too. So you could just start, if you wanted to, with the loop pedal, imitating the bass drum only. And then after you have that, you can put the snare on beats 2 and 4. So let's go. I'm going to do 2 measures. And then I'm going to add the on beats 2 and 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we can add some like It's actually a cool accidental thing that happened there, but now it's not. And so, so I'm going to do like a disco line on this. It's 2 measures. So that's using that idea that you had of doing the walking line and then going through that. So let's see, I was doing an A minor chord to a D7 chord is what I'm applying there. Let's see. Cool. So now I got a fun groove to play over. Using A Dorian to play over this. Technically, this is a 2-5 progression, and so if we did a 2-5-1, our 1 would be G, but because it's just going back and forth between A minor and D7, I'm going to think of this as A Dorian. So that's the scale. There it is again with a different rhythm. See how just adding a rhythm to it can make it totally different. That's something that would be really hard to do on the rubber strings, by the way. So that's one advantage to the metal strings and the flat wound strings is fingers don't get caught up on them. So you can play using that triplet finger technique where we're going ring, middle, index. I don't think I'd be able to do it very well on the rubber strings. It would kill the groove kind of because the notes would come out a little bit late because you have to adjust a lot if you want to make the notes come out on time on those. And then what I usually do at the end of something like this slow fade out. But yeah, that was a good idea. I guess some disco, you can really just play a walking line and then add eighth notes into it and make sure you're playing in a straight rhythm, not a swung rhythm. Interesting. Hi, George. What U-bass did you get? That's awesome. So if anybody has any last questions, let me know. We're basically at the end of the live stream. So if you have any questions you want answered real quick, go ahead and type them in. And otherwise, I will talk to you guys next week. Oh, you got the Hadeen. I still don't know how to pronounce it, even though I had one too. Yeah, those are good basses. At least the one that I got, I didn't have much trouble with after I adjusted the truss rod. I did have to adjust the truss rod to get a couple of buzzes out, but I think I remember that particular bass had a buzz somewhere in the middle, and then with the Kala Wanderer, it had one low down here. But then when I want to say I loosened the truss rod to get the neck to bow a little bit rather than straightening it out, and when I loosened it, it didn't get rid of the buzz, but instead of the buzz being down here on the Kala Wanderer, on the Hadeen or Hadeen, it actually, I think, did get rid of it. But it moved it up here on notes I wouldn't normally play. So unless I was doing like a solo arrangement. So hopefully yours doesn't even need to be adjusted. Oh, wow. All right. Well, thank you everybody for hanging in. Let me look at this one question. Does this say Horn Master Blaster? Super tempted to get a Wanderer. Is that the best for the cheaper end of things? Budget is tight at the moment. Unless you're looking for a used one, I would say I do like my Wanderer. But yet again, when I got it, there was a buzz on the first fret on the A string, and when I went to do the truss rod adjustment, I had to adjust it in such a way that it caused a couple of buzzes on the A string up here, and maybe even the D string. Looks like right now it's buzzing slightly more than it did, and I must mention that it's humid down here, and I haven't done any adjustments to this since then. So it may be that I need to adjust it again, but I haven't really had any issues with it. And most of the time, you're not going to be playing past the 12th fret. So if you can get the buzz out of this area of the neck from here all the way up to here, then that should be fine. I think the honestly, the Hadeen or Hadeen is probably about as good in a lot of these regards. But with both of them, you may just have to do some minor tweaks just to fix them up a little bit, and things may change over time. If it's been a year and a half since I've done anything to that one, so it may just be time for another adjustment. But I think it's okay. I think they're both really good instruments. All right. So as far as theory, with books, I don't have any like straightforward suggestions right now. I'm working on a course, so I want to release a beginner course that kind of goes through some of that. But all the theory that I'm talking about now, if you go to my beginner playlist, you can find videos on it. So there's a video on arpeggios. There are videos on different types of scales. I know I mentioned the Dorian mode and didn't really explain the Dorian mode just now. There's a video on the Dorian mode. I'm not sure if I put it on the beginner playlist, but if you search U-bass and the word Dorian, you'll probably come up with some information on that. You could go through my beginner playlist because it'll kind of like step it up a notch. And then if you want to learn stuff more complicated than that, I mean, college theory textbooks and stuff can get way more advanced than that. It just depends on how far you want to go with it. I don't have a particular go-to book that I use though. But yeah, so there's a tiny bit of buzz there. I don't get that issue with the metal strings at all. I think it's just because the rubber strings vibrate at a wider range that the strings just have to be a little bit higher up. But that's just something to keep in mind too. All right, guys. Well, that's it for today. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of the live stream. If you haven't yet, like the video. It's good for the algorithm, so that way you can find my U-based videos when I release new ones. And I'm going to include a link to all my gear from now on with my videos. I just figured out how to put it all in one place. And if y'all want to check out the different gear, so it's like I have the Wanderer on there, and the Journeyman and the Exotic Mahogany. I've got the Fender Jazz Bass, a link to all those instruments. I'm going to include that, and I also have links to like what gear I use to record. So I will add that to the description after this. And I'm just going to mention that they are affiliate links. So if you purchase through them, it does support the channel. You don't have to. It's also just a good way. It goes to Amazon when you click on each instrument. So you can also just look at the specs if you're just curious about the instruments that I use. Okay, so that's it for today. I will see you guys next week. Cheers.